So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 110, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Sameer Shariff, who's the CEO of Cambly. So Cambly is a marketplace for people to access on-demand English-speaking tutors. They've been mentioned as a breakout marketplace and one of YC's top companies to watch in 2022. They've also recently raised over $60 million from some of the best marketplace investors like Bessemer, Benchmark, and more. So this is a really great chat with Sameer, where we got to learn more about the founding story of Cambly, did a deep dive into it as a marketplace, got to learn more about their growth, fundraising journey, and also had a really great Q&A. So I really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Sameer, welcome to the group chat. I've been super interested to learn more about Cambly as a marketplace. So I'm really excited to have you join us here today and learn more about it. Before we jump into things, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background, though, for those that don't know you.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, thank you for having me. I've heard great things about the community, so super happy to be here. I grew up on the East Coast in the US. I went to college over there. I started my career at Google. I was a software engineer there for about 5 years. It was a really good place to get my career started. I learned a lot about good software engineering, how a really well-run organization operates, and so learned a ton from that experience. But I think being here in Silicon Valley, I think you can't help but wonder about startups, and you just kind of hear about them all the time, and so. I got pretty curious about kind of the startup world, and I wanted to give it a try. And so, a former colleague of mine had actually started a company, and so I joined as employee number 2 at his startup, and it was sort of my crash course on how startups actually work. You read a lot about them, you hear a lot about them, but it was really different to actually be a part of one. I described it a little bit like I felt like I was in the stadium watching a game for a while, and then all of a sudden one day I was on the field, on a team, and I loved it. I think I actually really liked my time at Google, but I felt like I was early in my career. I wanted to explore what startups were like, and so I think what I found out is it was much better suited for me. And so I worked at that startup for a couple of years, and then started working on Cambly. Now in 2013 is when I started working on it full time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing your background with us. What were maybe some of those kind of initial learnings or lessons that you've taken with you to Cambly?
Yeah, so I think different stuff from Google and from my time working at this other startup. I think at Google, one, I just learned how to be a good software engineer. I was a fresh college grad. I didn't know much about technology, and so there's a lot of very concrete, specific skills I learned there. I worked on a team that was specifically focused on metrics, and we built basically kind of the A/B testing framework for Google search, and so it was a highly analytical team, and a lot of things we did there actually translated really well to the startup world, because metrics are really important, and understanding how, I think particularly in consumer businesses, the power of being able to run an A/B test and actually learn from that. Often the results of that don't necessarily line up with your intuition. And so I learned a lot about sort of the fundamentals of experimentation and how to iterate on a consumer product. And then I think I learned kind of a lot of the fundamentals at Google, but putting it in practice in a startup environment was really, really valuable as well. Just because, Google, you don't have to think about getting users, right? You have billions of people showing up every day. So there's all these things that you just don't need to think about as a software engineer at Google, versus when you're getting started at a company with no customers, that's life and death basically. And so I think I learned a lot of fundamentals and core skills at Google, but I think figuring out how to apply them to startups was super valuable as well. And so by the time I started Cambly, I kind of had, I think, both sides of that, and it was really, really valuable to me.
Yeah, certainly. And so, so what was the founding story of Cambly?
Yeah, totally. I grew up here in the U.S. as I mentioned. I took Spanish in high school, and honestly, I was like pretty bad at it. It was probably my worst subject, which is ironic given what I'm doing today. And I just like kind of thought I wasn't really a languages person. And um, Sort of independent of that, I love to travel. I love to go to different places in the world. I love to meet people, learn about their lives, their culture. And so I did a lot of that. And some of the places I would go to, people only spoke Spanish. And it kind of took an environment like that to like really get me sort of out of my shell and practicing speaking. And so I took one trip in particular to Argentina that was, I think, pretty formative for me. And I was, I found myself often in situations where like I was surrounded by people that only spoke Spanish. And so like I wanted to talk to them. Like I could either keep to myself or I could, try to dust off my old Spanish skills. Like I said, like I think it took that kind of environment for me to like really sort of dust off those old skills and try to speak. And what I found is I just got so much better so quickly. And not just that, it was like far more rewarding than it ever was in a classroom environment. And so, my co-founder, I think, had a really similar, my co-founder's name is Kevin, he had a really similar experience learning French in school and then going to France and sort of comparing that classroom environment to like immersing yourself in the country, in a country where they speak the language, speaking the language all the time. And so he and I got together around this idea, like, why can't, there's no reason why I should be able to talk to a Spanish speaker whenever I want. There's no reason you should be able to talk to a French speaker whenever you want. There's plenty of people that speak those languages. They just don't happen to live near us. And so it seemed like the kind of problem that technology could solve. And as technologists and product people, we decided, okay, I think we can tackle this. I think we can make this better. And what we wanted actually wasn't like a professional teacher. What we wanted was just someone to talk to. It's very similar to what you do if you strike up a conversation when traveling, like very much inspired by this immersive environment. And so, as I mentioned, Kevin wanted to learn French, I wanted to learn Spanish, but I think as we looked at the market, we quickly realized that the world wants to learn English. And so we decided to really focus on that.
Yeah, I can certainly relate. I took Spanish back in school, and a lot easier to learn when traveling. So what were the actual like first steps that you took to start it as a marketplace? And as marketplaces, we have the challenge of kind of balancing supply and demand, or chicken and the egg. So what did you kind of start with?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think what we tried to do basically early on is just fix one side of the marketplace, like just make it work. And so in the very, very early days, actually, Kevin and I were the only two tutors. And so, the service, I guess I didn't really introduce what we built. What we built is an app where you press a button and within a few seconds, you get a friendly native English speaker over video chat. And basically it's a two-sided marketplace. So on one side, you've got students who pay a subscription fee to access the service. On the other side, you have tutors and they get paid for minutes they spend for time they spend talking with students. And so that's kind of the rough setup of the product, the marketplace. So in the early days, Kevin and I were the only two tutors. So we basically spend our days either like writing code and building the product, and then constantly be interrupted. Every time a student called in, we would like run off to the other room and talk to them for a few minutes. And so we were like personally delivering all of the service, all of value on this service. Obviously, like we both lived in San Francisco, and we slept roughly the same hours. And it turns out, those hours when we're sleeping, a lot of people, in different parts of the world are waking up and wanting to practice their English. And so it was pretty broken. Like it didn't work great, but I think it was still like a really valuable thing for us to do because, early on, you just like want to talk to your customers so you can like really deeply understand their problem. And it was a way for us to do that. So it was really valuable for us to do. And I think the interesting thing about Cambly is what our customers wanted was to talk to native English speakers, which we happen to be. And so it was actually this sort of symbiotic relationship was really beneficial to both sides. So I think it was a great way to get started. But we always really wanted the service to be on demand, like press a button anytime, day or night, and you instantly get an English speaker. And uh, and obviously that wasn't going to work if like Kevin and I were the only two tutors on the platform and we were, asleep roughly the same hours, right? And so we started to build a community of tutors. And what we did was actually pretty simple. We effectively just paid people to sit around and be available on the off chance that a customer would call in. And we structured it in kind of a clever way, so it was pretty cost effective. But effectively, we were like, we want to deliver this service to students, even though we don't have very many students at all. We want to deliver this experience, and let's just pay for it, knowing that as you start to build up the student side, then the economics will start to make sense. And so we just kind of made it. We just literally we were funding the company out of pocket, and so we were really scrappy. But I would tell friends, I'm like, oh yeah, like try Cambly out. Like I'm literally paying someone right now to sit around and wait for you to you to call in just so the thing works. And so I think it was a great way to like sort of hack it so we could get the product, the core product working, and then we could start to learn about how students valued that kind of service.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of head nods here. I think there's a lot of founders that have been, their own or their first kind of suppliers for their marketplace.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's fun. It's a good way to start.
Yeah, certainly. So, for some context too. So, did you start as a global marketplace, or were you kind of constrained as far as when it comes to locations or geographies?
Yeah, so that's I think something there's a lot of things that are like strange about Cambly, strange and interesting about our company. I think one of the first things that comes to mind here is that I talked about our experience learning other languages, and that was the inspiration for the product. But we realized that English is this like much bigger problem in the world. And to give you a sense of that, like there's 7.58 billion people in the world. There's 6 billion people who don't know English. So it's this like enormous problem in the world. Like that's the market. And by the way, of those 6 billion, about 1.5 billion are actively trying to learn English right now. And so huge market, but not a problem that like, I think what's really interesting, but it's not a problem that probably any of us really see every day, right? Like we speak English. I assume if you're on this chat and you're listening to me, you probably speak English. And not just that, like we don't just speak English, and I've never experienced this problem personally, but odds are you may not know anyone who has this problem. And so it gives you the sense that like it's actually not that big of a problem in the world because we're English speakers, and we don't have it ourselves. But I talked about my experience learning Spanish, or my co-founder's experience learning French. Learning English is very different from learning other languages. Like for people that are trying to learn English, it will fundamentally change their life if they could just learn English. We get like unlock immense economic opportunity, get a job they wouldn't be able to get otherwise, travel, move to a country they would have a better life. Access to information, I think, is a really big one out, where like we kind of take for granted that like there's all this information in English and we have ready access to it. But if you don't know English and you only know Arabic or Portuguese or whatever else, like there's just less information out there for you. And so coming back to your question, okay, when we were getting started, we quickly realized that, hey, this is not a problem that we can market to people like us and our friends. Like they don't have this challenge. Like so we very much had to be like international from day one. And like that was challenging, right? Because like it was unlike anything I'd ever worked on before, where like the first version of the product was localized in like 10 different languages, right? Like and by definition our customers didn't speak English, right? Those are the people we're going after. And so you can't just like build an English interface and say, cool, like why aren't all these people who don't know English showing up and using this thing, right? And so I think there was we had to take a pretty different approach. And so we were very much international from day one. We kind of put the product out there and we saw what parts of the world did people start to show up.
Yeah, and also too, just a little bit of context, what sense of scale are you at today?
Yeah, so so I mentioned, in the early days, Kevin and I personally did all the tutoring and delivered all the value of the platform. And so we've come a really long way since then. And today we do over 1 year of one-on-one tutoring every single day. And so there's a lot of education and a lot of tutoring that's happening on the platform each day. And so yeah, we've scaled a ton since then.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah, I was actually asking because it sounds like, across so many markets that, there's probably lots of different product ops and even kind of marketing nuances within each market, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we were getting started, we were two Americans trying to market this English education product to places all over the world. And as you can imagine, we weren't very good at it, right? We had no idea how to market to Korea or to Brazil or Turkey, right? And so I think that was it was a big unlock for us to figure out how to start to do that. And effectively the strategy we took is we hired really amazing country managers that were from the country, understood the language, the culture, and gave them kind of a broad scope of hey, can you make this product grow in your market, and gave them a lot of ownership, a lot of autonomy, and not just did they understand the language and the culture, but they also kind of knew what are the growth channels that are going to work in that market. And so that's a strategy that we kind of explored pretty early on. Literally our first hire at the company, we were two ex-Google software engineers, and employee number one was a Korea country manager. It's pretty odd makeup for a 30-person team. And at the time, we'd been really interested in Korea. We'd gone there and spent a few weeks there just to study the market after a bunch of people told us that they're really crazy about English education. But we had 2 customers in Korea or something. Literally, we'd made no progress there. And then we hired this Korea country manager, and within a few months, it was our top market. And so I think as entrepreneurs, you can imagine, you look at that and you're like, whoa, that worked. Okay, we got to do that again. And so, we've built out, now we have 10 plus country managers, markets that have scaled immensely, 100x since we hired those folks. And so, yeah, we've come a long way, but I think that was actually a really big unlock for us to figure out kind of the model that allowed us to reach our customers much more effectively.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like your kind of market expansion kind of playbook is having a country GM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for a business like ours, it's I remember thinking when we were hiring that Korea country manager, the first one, it was you're supposed to kind of look at your team and figure out, okay, where are the holes? What are the gaps? And how do I fill those gaps? And I remember thinking I could spend the next 10 years studying Korean and studying the culture and still be nowhere close to someone who just grew up there. And so it seemed like a really good and obvious thing for me to for a gap in the team that we wanted to fill. And so we found that, we started there and we found that to be really, really effective. And you can't just hire anyone. They need to have the right set of skills. And they tend to be actually folks like us, who are very entrepreneurial, very scrappy. I often describe it as hey, you're launching a new company in your country. Go find your first customers, go start to develop a brand. You've got the support from headquarters where that's where product is built. That's where our tutor operations are run. But outside of that, you're launching a new thing in your country, and yeah, go do it. It's very much, I think you want the enterprising entrepreneurial type of person to do that.
Yeah, that's really a great point. A lot of marketplace founders kind of say that some of the GMs are CEOs of their own kind of markets. So,
yeah.
So what is the team like today? And maybe kind of the org structure?
Yeah, definitely. So we were 150-ish people right now, and very international, as you can imagine. So similar to our customer base, we have we're headquartered in San Francisco, but then we've got teams and offices in each of our major markets. And those teams basically they kind of whatever the country manager GM did. They scaled themselves and built out teams, and so they run marketing and they do customer support, and they're kind of running the business in their respective markets. And so yeah, we've got a centralized product engineering team. We've got these GMs that have teams that report up to them. And yeah, we basically have like kind of our core functions, things like finance, product design, engineering, tutor operations, all in San Francisco. And then we've got these teams that report to our GMs in market. And then we've actually, like, in terms of the team, we've we made it pretty far with like a pretty scrappy team of learners, which I think definitely put me and my co-founder in that category. Like, we hadn't done a lot of this before, and we were kind of figuring things out along the way. And then in the last year, we've brought on actually a lot of leaders with like really incredible and relevant experience. And so, former head of finance of Airbnb experiences, a couple of leaders from Pinterest, head of product design and head of core product there, and then a few other folks as well, to lead our people org, our legal org. And so we've brought on actually a really incredible set of leaders onto the team, and so it's been really fun, I think, to integrate them and draw from their experience. And I think what it's allowing us to do is learning can be slow along the way. And I think if you can draw from that experience and the lessons they've already learned, it just allows you to go much, much faster as an organization. And so that's been kind of an exciting shift for us in the last year or so.
Yeah, certainly. You briefly mentioned it, but I did want to bring up that topic because it seems like it's like a 9-year overnight success, right? Like, not much has been shared about Cambly. Then all of a sudden you're on the radar, and kind of mentioned as I believe one of YC's kind of breakout companies of 2022, right? So could you maybe share more about maybe some of the I would say like the pivotal stages in growth?
Yeah. So interestingly, like, Cambly's actually been growing at a really healthy clip all of those 9 years. And we actually just deliberately decided to keep a low profile about it. I think we're building something that's gonna be really big and meaningful. And we just said, hey, we're gonna just be heads down and focus on growing that business. You might be wondering, okay, why the change of heart in the last few months? For example, by the way, we'd raised a seed round after YC. We had raised a Series A. We had raised a Series A from Bessemer, a Series B, like a $40 million Series B led by Benchmark. We hadn't really announced any of those rounds. We just kind of kept quiet about them, which I think is unusual. I think most founders would have kind of taken that moment to share the news and make some noise about that. But we decided to just kind of keep quiet about it, and then we decided in the last few months that, hey, we're going to actually start announcing that. And so we effectively announced 8 years of funding in the last few months, which is very atypical. The reason we decided to do that is because we're actually the business is in a really good spot right now. The business is in a really good spot. The team's in a really good spot. We feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to execute really fast. And in order to do that, we need more great people to join us. And so we decided that we're just growing the team a lot. And we decided that the trade-off of keeping a low profile is probably no longer worth it, just given how much hiring we're doing. And so we want the best people to come work at Cambly, and so you got to know about the company in order to come work at us, and so that's why we started telling our story more.
Awesome. Yeah. And you did mention raising from some pretty amazing investors like Bessemer and Benchmark, and kind of 8 years of not announcing. So could you share a little bit more about that journey, maybe kind of going back to your earliest rounds and what it was like?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. It definitely wasn't always easy. I've attempted to fundraise several times and succeeded, a handful of them as well. And, my personal experience is it kind of goes one of two ways. Either it goes super smoothly and super well, or it is painful, it drags out. And in my experience, it often doesn't get done in that scenario, or at least I say hey, it's no longer worth it. And so, I actually end up talking to a lot of founders about fundraisers, and like, you know, uh, I think again, I'm one data point, and so I talk about my own experience, but I really like to have the company be in like a really really strong position for a fundraise. Like obviously I like to fundraise when it's easy, not when it's hard, basically. And so that might be a function of how the market is doing. It may be a function of like where the business is at the moment. But it can be such an uphill battle, and I've fought some of those uphill battles and then eventually been like, never mind, I'm not going to fundraise right now. And then I've also had experiences where like I've it's just like come together really smoothly, really like, my dream investor, right? And so yeah, I think focusing on the traction of the business, just like really being heads down and being like, how do I make this business so compelling that like you'd be crazy to say no. Cambly's also been cash flow positive for the last 5 years. And that was something that we got to not necessarily by choice. Our hand was forced. Like we went out to raise a Series A in 2017, and it did not go as planned. We did not get the reception we were expecting. And that was pretty stressful because we actually weren't in a great position at the time. We were burning a decent amount of cash. We didn't have a lot of money in the bank. And we basically we brought the team together and we're like, hey, we were going to raise a Series A. It didn't work. Here's plan B. And plan B is we're going to get the company to cash flow positive. And it was an intense and highly focused period. But over the span of 4 months, we took a company that was burning a lot of cash, not a lot of the money in the bank, to a company that was cash flow positive. And then like a year later, we went back to a lot of those same investors that had said no in 2017. And we basically had grown the business a ton without any external capital. We'd basically done what we said we were going to do if they gave us money without the money. And it was super compelling. And so, we ended up getting 4 term sheets for the Series A, and they were all people that had passed in one form or the other a prior year. So it was such a different experience that I guess one, I was like, cool, it's really nice to fundraise from a position of strength. How do you put the company in and these investors are smart people. Like you just make a better company and they're more likely to be interested. The irony is the less you need the money, the more likely they're going to want to give it to you. And so I just tend to focus on those things. And we've kept the company cash flow positive ever since. And so I think that makes the fundraising a lot smoother in my opinion. That was one attempted and sort of failed fundraise, but we had previous ones as well where it kind of, for me, it sort of went one way or the other.
No, thanks for sharing with us on that. It's also encouraging to hear that investors eventually kind of came around, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to get into questions here in a second because we have a few founders that want to come on. But before we do, so you have some pretty awesome experience, building and scaling Cambly. So do you have any tips for earlier stage marketplace founders?
Yeah. So I touched on a few of them. I think a lot of what YC kind of trains you for is just like really focus on just like delivering a great user experience. And I think when you're very early getting started, I think there's lots of distractions of things you like quote unquote should be doing as an entrepreneur and as a founder. And I think the more you can kind of like let a lot of that noise fade away and just like, how do I really focus on just like delivering a great experience for, as YC says, like make something people want. I think that's really, really helpful in the early stages. I think you can have a lot of your time sucked up with like administrative type stuff and whatnot, and I think like just like you get that like core thing of like this product is something really people really, really want. I think that's incredibly valuable. And then I think, in the category of distractions, I've talked a little bit of fundraising. I think fundraising could be a pretty big distraction. So I tend to follow also YC's advice of like, don't really engage too much with investors unless you're actually fundraising. And so just like, again, that focus, like if you want to have a successful fundraise, the best thing you can do is make your business way better. Like it's way better than anything else. And that takes a lot of focus, and it's a hard thing. And it's sort of like if you let a lot of the other things disappear and you're like, I just want to do this, like I want to focus on this one thing and I'm going to make my business really good. I think it can be super powerful. We touched a little bit on the chicken egg problem. I think like I'm a big fan of just like, I think especially in those early stages, like you don't really know necessarily where you're going. You're kind of wandering about trying to find product market fit, trying to find something that resonates. I like to be like super scrappy at that stage. And so if if you're engineers like me and my co-founder were, then you build product, but you build it in a pretty different way than you build if you knew that product's going to exist forever. Like you're just like trying to move really fast. You're trying to put stuff out there so you can learn from it quickly. You're comfortable with the idea that you're going to throw away all of that code over time if you're successful at all. That's actually like kind of the point. But you don't want to like spend a ton of time like architecting everything perfectly, because like then it's going to take you a lot longer, and it's going to like if you're going to throw it away anyway, then who cares, right? Like the most important thing is that you figure out these fundamental questions around like, is the space I'm exploring, like, is there value there? If you're not an engineer, I actually often encourage people to like find hacky ways to like validate what you're doing. And so like, you could have imagined us like stringing something together with a spreadsheet and Skype and whatever else was out there. Maybe not Skype, maybe Google Meet or whatever we'd use today. But I think I like just like trying to get like, what are your hypotheses about whether the thing is gonna, the thing you're building is actually valuable? Like, is it valuable enough for someone to use it? Is it valuable enough for someone to pay for it? Like, kind of think really carefully through like, what are the open questions and what are the hypotheses you have? And then how do you go out and test them as fast as possible? And yeah, cadence makes a huge difference, because the faster you can put stuff out there and observe and learn, the faster you're going to get to something that's actually working. And we're pretty far along compared to those early days, but I think we're still in the early days of our company. And so actually, this is a thing that we're still trying to hang on to. Like, how do we get stuff out there quickly, test hypotheses, and kind of now we're building we're getting an organization to behave that way. But in the earliest days, it was just kind of two of us, I think, operating that way. And in some ways, it's easier because if you and your co-founders agree, you can kind of just act that way. Versus when you have a big org, you need to kind of figure out how to get an organization to behave that way.
Yeah, certainly. These are some really good tips, and quite a few are relatable. So
yeah.
Hey, John, do you want to come on with the question?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sameer. This has been great.
Thank you.
And I actually just chatted with Dorothy Lee a couple of weeks ago, who was in the early days of Cambly, so she gave me a lot of tips. My background, I'm building a coaching marketplace. We've raised $5 million, 10 employees, kind of early stages product market fit, but still kind of testing a lot of things, scrappy. My question is about your pricing model, which I think, if you look at a lot of the competitors or other people in the space, or if you look at like marketplaces broadly, there's a lot of these flexible models where supply side determines, here's my hourly rate, or here's like how much a package will work. And you guys opted for a subscription model, which I imagine comes with a lot of advantages with conversion and other things. I'm curious if you could talk to how you see that like subscription model versus a more open-ended pricing model being an advantage, or maybe some of the disadvantages, and how you thought about that.
Yeah, totally. Well, first off, I'm glad you get to talk to Dorothy. She probably would say, she's amazing and she knows Cambly in and out. And so she was our employee number 3 at the company, and a lot of things I'm talking about, like she built that stuff from the ground up. So she's a great person to chat with. The pricing stuff is really interesting and I think really powerful. You see a lot of the people in our space kind of follow more of like an open marketplace model. And there's actually a lot of like really interesting advantages of doing it that way. I think you get kind of better like price discovery. You kind of can let your supply set their own price point. And so there's a lot of interesting things you get from an open marketplace. We've gone for this sort of like highly managed marketplace, if you want to describe it that way, like largely because it just like makes for a really simple consumer experience. Like you just kind of sign up for Cambly, and then you have like thousands of tutors to choose from and talk to. And so I think the simplicity is a big driver for us. in terms of the subscription, I think like, I think when we want to encourage people to use the product. And I think we always felt like we actually were pay as you go in the very earliest days. But we always felt like we were like pushing people away because like they were kind of having to justify that each incremental lesson or even minute they spent is like, was that worth this time? And so I think the nice thing about a subscription model is it kind of gives you a bit more like what I would call like the season pass mentality. Like you already paid the thing, you might as well use it. And so I think it's good from a business perspective because people pay upfront for stuff, and it's good from a consumer perspective because they've kind of already made the decision that, hey, I'm going to use this thing, and I want to. I might as well use it. Basically, I already paid for it, and so I think those are the kind of two in terms of managed marketplace versus open marketplace. I think we've gone for the managed just because I think it's more simple from a consumer experience, and then for subscriptions, I think we like. I really like the season pass mentality of like, I paid for this thing, I might as well use it. So that I think those are kind of some of the big driving factors for us.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, great question though.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So thanks for asking, John. Hey, actually, Sameer, so I had a question about that. I'm sure that kind of changes your unit economics a little bit and kind of how you market and acquire customers.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because like unlike a lot of other marketplaces, we don't have like a fixed take rate. Like it's not like there's a transaction that's $100 and then we keep 20% of that. We basically set prices on the consumer side, and then we have fixed pay on the tutor side. And so our like take is effectively like a function of utilization. So yeah, it's a bit more complex. There's actually some interesting benefits of kind of decoupling the way you like collect money from one side of the marketplace and pay out on the other. And I think other significant marketplaces, things like Uber and Lyft, have actually, they started kind of with what I initially described and have moved more to like this decoupled model. And it just gives you a lot of like pricing power effectively. Like you can kind of float, if you imagine like, you're a driver, an Uber driver, and like Uber's model is like, we're going to take 20%, a 20% cut. And it's like, that's just kind of how it's surfaced to drivers. And then one day you decide, hey, we're having trouble, raising our next round, we need a bigger margin. Now you're going to have a tough conversation with all the supply in your marketplace. Whereas if you're kind of dynamically priced on both sides, or at least on the demand side, you can kind of float that price freely without having to like figure out, without having to basically communicate or negotiate with the supply side of your marketplace. And so I think there's some benefits there.
I'll have to stop myself from going deeper on this. I feel like we could go on for some time.
Yeah, it's a fun topic.
Yeah. Hey, Connie, do you want to come on?
Sure. Thanks for being here, Sameer. I really appreciate how transparent you've been this whole time, and especially your story about the 2017 Series A failure, which I feel like we learned the most from. So I'm building a mentorship matching for startup teams right now, and really interested in how you recruited tutors, especially now that you have, it seems like 3 markets, like general public, organizations, and kids. It seems like all of them would both require very different recruitment and vetting of tutors. So wondering if you can kind of talk through like, how do you recruit and vet for each of those? Does it change? And if needed, how do you like take people off the platform, that sort of thing?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a lot here. And actually, like, it's interesting, like we've historically been like a demand constrained marketplace, so we can kind of grow as fast as we can grow in demand. And so, you heard me talk a lot about how we've grown in all these different markets, and I didn't talk as much about supply side. The supply side is super interesting, but it's generally been like less hard for us. Like, I think in the very early days, we would like, post to jobs boards, job boards, things like Craigslist, just like super scrappy stuff to just like get the few, our first few tutors in. But it's a really cool job. Like you get to like talk to interesting people around the world. You can work from home. You can work whatever hours you want. And so honestly, actually, a lot of our growth on the tutor side has come through like word of mouth over the years. Like we've typically had a wait list of people who really want to join Cambly. And it's also easier because one side of the marketplace is paying, the other one's getting paid. And so I feel like there's some inherent things that are easier to recruit on the side that's getting paid. And so, and actually in terms of those three verticals, like organizations actually kind of shares supply. Like we kind of use the same pool of tutors as we do for like end consumers. So that's actually like a single shared supply. Kids is a different set. But we've actually, because we grew our adult product so much before we launched kids, we actually had like an enormous pool of tutors that we could draw from. And so a lot of our kids tutors actually have just come from like the sort of the long list of adult tutors that we've collected over the years. Yeah, I don't know if I have any like. I'm trying to think of like what's one of the useful tips and tricks I could share here. I think we've just spent a lot less energy and effort on the tutor side. I think the one thing I will say is like because we did it like gradually over so many years, like I don't mean to say that the supply side of our marketplace is easy. It's definitely not. But we just like got really, really good. Like in terms of like managing it, I think there's like a lot of interesting stuff there where because like my co-founder and I are both software engineers, we automated every time anything, like we do stuff manually initially. And then anytime anything got like annoying or repetitive, we would just be like, okay, how do I write some code to automate this? And so we've built a lot of systems that allow us to like very efficiently manage like an army of tutors. And I think it's allowed us to scale up super efficiently. Dorothy, who John mentioned earlier, I think helped us build a lot of those systems, and we've scaled the supply side a ton, really, really efficiently. I know that's not exactly your question, but I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there about like if you kind of do things carefully and you kind of study the supply side and automate things and build like better and better processes. I think it's a competitive advantage for us for how efficiently we've been able to scale the supply.
Sweet, thanks. Maybe one quick follow-up. Do you have to build, sure. Have you had to build anything very intentionally for tutor retention, or that kind of just like grew as you built better tools?
So yeah, tutor retention is really good. So a lot of it, I think, just the way that our setup worked, like people stuck around. I think it's helpful that the tutors tend to build a set of regulars and they have a relationship with those regulars. And so they're kind of building like their book of business on Cambly. And I think there's retentive properties of the relationships that are built on both sides. Like students stick around because they have their favorite tutor or tutors, and tutors stick around because they have their set of regular students. So you can think a little bit about in your marketplace, like how to foster those relationships to like keep both sides on the platform. I think like, obviously like making money is a good way to retain the supply side of your marketplace. And so like, I think we've built things that have effectively allowed our best tutors to like build their business faster. And so I think it's valuable to not think of your like supply as like uniform. Like there's always going to be like a bell curve and a distribution. And so I think things you can do to like make sure like the best suppliers on your marketplace have a really good experience. And so, very concretely, like you've got this, this pipe or this fire hose of demand, like where do you point it basically? And if you just point it like uniformly across your supply, that's going to like, spread the retentive properties of that demand evenly. But if you can point it in a more targeted way where like the best supply gets the best experience, you're just going to end up building like a better marketplace because your best supply will stick around. Your less good supply will naturally fall off. And you mentioned kind of like removing people, like we have processes to do that. You can have students report tutors and we can review the incident and so forth. So there's ways to kind of cut the like lowest performers on the supply side. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff about like, not just like, you look at the distribution, you're not just chopping off the like bottom, but you're also figuring out how do I get the top really happy? because I think you'll just keep better supply, and that supply is great at teaching students. You'll have a better product. Like in our, I always describe Cambly. Cambly's not about the app; it's about like the tutor. Like everything else is a plumbing to get you to talking with a tutor. And so I think our product is very much like our tutors. And so the better your supply can be, the better experience it's going to be for students. Cool. Yeah, great question, Connie. And thanks for the follow-up, because I feel like I got you a little more meat to think about there.
Yeah, that was a really great question. Let's see. Hey, Andrew, do you want to come on?
Sure. Thanks, Sameer. It's congrats on the business.
Thank you.
It just sounds awesome what you guys have built. A bunch of things like resonated with me, like on this idea of like throwing the code away and being comfortable with that, and chucking a lot of stuff at the wall. I think it's something a lot of founders aren't able to do. So that's a huge thing. The thing I wanted to ask about, because I'm really curious about the details, because I've been there myself a few times, is that 2017 period. How did you guys get to profitability or cash flow positive or whatever the numbers you're looking at? Like you sat there, you weren't able to raise the A, you had to figure out a plan B. It's easy to say, okay, plan B, let's get profitable, let's be able to sustain ourselves. What was it? Like what was there a key like insight there, or what were you able to achieve? And then a follow-up to that is, why did you decide then to go and raise the A to pour fuel on? Like what happened in that period? I'm really curious about the details there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, first off, I'm glad that throwing away code resonates with you. I was never like the best engineer, so I love writing throwaway code. It's my favorite thing. So, yeah. So yeah, super.
We had a metric
period.
which was most lines of code deleted was like something
Nice.
we really praised.
I love it. I love it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a really interesting period for the company, and yeah, I think probably the most stressful period, in the history of Cambly for me personally, and I think my co-founder as well. But also like very, very productive in a very short period of time. And you'd always hear about like, the benefits of not being flush with cash, and like, how being scrappy and not having a ton of capital like has all these benefits. I was always skeptical of that, honestly. When I heard it, I was like, why can't you just pretend like you have less money and then make all those same great decisions? But I learned that year that like it is different when there's a gun to your head and you're like, I think it was the only period in the history of the company where there was like an existential risk. Like if we don't make the right set of decisions now, like the company may not exist in the future. And I think like it's really interesting, I think, to reflect on that, even that statement. Like the Cambly is scaled a lot since that period, and the company is like, I think in lots of objective ways like been pretty successful, but like we almost like died in that period, right? Like I think it speaks to sort of the fragility of startups, like even ones that like are building the right thing for the right market at the right time. Like they're just like, they're fragile in these early days, so you just have to be really like smart about the decisions you make. And yeah, I like being really lean and kind of stretching every dollar to as far as you can go. But yeah, so that period was stressful but highly productive. Well, yeah, what are the decisions we made? So I touched on one of them in terms of like pricing. So we really did like two things, and we did it quickly, and we did it decisively. We raised our prices across the board, and I described this as something where like I think we might have made that decision anyway, but I think we would have debated about it. We would have stretched it out. We'd have like said, okay, like how about we roll out these price changes over the next 6 months or whatever, like we would have done it at a reasonable pace. And when you're in an existential risk, you don't do that. You're just like, we're going to change all our prices today. This is not a question. We're doing it basically. And so you just end up making some of those decisions quickly. And so we raise our prices. The other thing we did, and I mentioned cash flow positive, is like we sell long-term plans, and there's obviously like some pretty good cash flow implications there. Like if someone signs up for a year-long plan and they pay you upfront for that, you get a lot of cash upfront. And so we hadn't messed with prices that much, and our margin had kind of been shrinking as we like gave away bigger discounts and so forth. And so the price raise, just like our margin just like popped overnight, basically. And literally, actually, like I remember our gross profit graph that I was studying very, very closely at the time. Like I think it doubled in 2 months with this price change. Like it just doubled, and that's kind of the unit economics of the business, right? And so yeah, we raised prices, and then we were experimenting with long-term plans, but we hadn't like deployed them to like our whole customer base, and so we basically shipped it to everyone. We were doing it kind of as one-off promotions, but we were like, no, we're going to give this to everyone, and that combo basically gave us a much higher margin and gave us kind of more cash flow. And so those two things made a really big difference to kind of dig us out of the hole we'd kind of gotten ourselves into a bit. And then I think we suddenly had like more capital because like the business was just better. And so a lot of the growth that we had sort of in the months that followed was just like, we went from like a company that was very, very squeezed for capital and like couldn't even spend much to make good investments in growth to like all of a sudden a company that was like actually generating cash. And so although we didn't succeed at raising, we did succeed at effectively raising from our customers. And then we were able to start to invest some of that cash. And we were really smart about it because it wasn't as much money as we would have went out to raise in a Series A. But I think having a little extra capital to invest, and I think it was really compelling for investors because again, we didn't raise the money. We did the things we said we were going to do, and we did it on the help of the business. And so it's just like really, I think really, really compelling. And so your last part of your question, why did we go and raise? Even though we were cash flow positive, like we had between like, $1 and $2 million in the bank, like we were paying close attention. And it's hard to run a business like that, to be honest. Like, my co-founder and I, for the toughest part of that period, like we would literally write down what is on all of our bank balances, add them all up weekly and be like, okay, how are we doing? Like you end up spending a lot of energy, like doing the stuff that like, if you just had a buffer, you just like don't have to think about. Like you want to think about it a bit, but you don't need to like study it. Like we were just using a lot of our like mental capacity and brain power towards this. So I think getting a little bit of a buffer just like takes a lot of that pressure off. But I think the bigger thing is you want to be able to invest, right? Like if things are going well, you want to be able to invest. And like, we've been cash flow positive since that period. So we never touched the money in the Series A. We never touched the money in the Series B, which is crazy. But I think people are often asking me like, oh, well, if you didn't touch the money in the Series A and Series B, like, why did you raise it? And what I didn't say is like, we did not operate the company in the same way that we would have had we not raised that money. Like when we raised a $15 million Series A and a $40 million Series B, all of a sudden now we have like a huge cushion that lets us actually make long-term bets. And I think the biggest long-term bet you can make is you like hire amazing people onto your team. I think particularly on product, which engineers are expensive, and they're a long-term investment, right? Like they make the product better, which creates a lot of long-term value for the company. But it takes time to pay off. And like, post Series A, we immediately started hiring. We grew the team a lot. And I think same thing post Series B, like we've just been able to move much faster, move the product much faster forward and make a lot of smart investments that we now are comfortable enough to make.
Awesome. That's a great question. And I appreciate sharing more with us on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
We're going to try to squeeze in one last question. Hey, Kendall, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sameer. This is awesome. My background is early Yelp, Uber, and Skip the Dishes in Canada. And now I run a fractional advisory practice for marketplace and on-demand network scale-up specifically. So my question for you,
cool.
if you're interested though, as it pertains to the subscription model, is have you managed to determine the sweet spot of utilization that allows you to make the net you want and also have your target like user engagement rate to drive LTV? Like, have you guys, I would just love to hear how you think about that.
Yeah, totally. I'll tell you how I think about it because I think it won't exactly answer your sweet spot question, but I think it's a really good question. It's a question that when we introduced subscriptions, like we kind of thought about the same thing. And I think just for, everyone else, and I know Kendall, you're probably thinking about this way already, but if you think about utilization, if people use your product not at all, that's bad because they're not going to keep using it. They're not going to tell their friends about it. Presumably if they use a product 100%, then maybe you like don't make money on it, or you lose money on it. So that seems bad as well. we actually, like, my co-founder and I had like sort of a philosophical conversation about this. Like, is there a sweet spot? How do you think about that? Like, in this spectrum between 0% and 100%, like, what's the perfect spot? And then we kind of threw that out and basically said, let's just take a philosophical approach. Like, people are using our product more, it's just better. Like, they're gonna keep using it more, they're gonna tell other people about it. So the way we operate is we just try to drive up that number as much as humanly possible. And if we do too good of a job and we start losing money on our plans, then we just raise our prices. And it's like it takes this, like, I think, complex optimization problem and turns into like a really simple philosophical approach. And that's basically the way we've operated. And I think it's served us really well. And people using your product more is good for the long-term value of the business, even if it squeezes your margins a bit. And so you just, I think, thinking about it that way has been, it's simplified a complex problem, and taken a clear standard approach to it.
Thank you. I love that. I love companies like taking that longer term approach, and I love what you guys are doing. So thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. That was
Should
a great.
we do one more? Or?
Yeah, we're actually out of time here. So
Cool.
yeah, I really appreciate taking the time to join us. This is a really fun chat, and a huge congrats on all the the 9 years of all the great progress and growth here that we're just now hearing about. Last kind of question that I had for you, though, if you were to go back to right before you started Cambly, what would you tell yourself about marketplaces?
I mean, I'd probably start by telling myself, like, it's a long journey. Like, I don't think neither me nor my co-founder thought what, we obviously believe that this is a big, important problem to solve, and there was a big market. But, it takes time, I think, like, at this, on one hand, like, when your product resonates with someone, you can see it, you can see like the magic that's happening, but like, you're pushing this thing along like every step of the way. And so it takes time. I know you guys all know that marketplaces are hard. Like, you have to build kind of both sides. Like, they just take a lot of time. And I think they're really powerful when you get them right. And they have these inherent defensibility properties and so forth. But it just, be in for the long journey. And I think, I actually feel really fortunate with this one, like, because I'm just like, I'm more excited about this than like, I'm as excited as ever, maybe even more excited than I was when we started. Like, I think this is such a worthwhile problem. I think it's such an important problem, like, to solve, that like, I'm very, very happy to be working on it, 9+ years later. But it's sort of a thing where, like, you don't want to like get into a business unless you like actually really care about the problem and can see yourself working on it for a long time. I mean, if the business doesn't work out, it doesn't really matter. But obviously, you're doing everything you possibly can to make it grow and make it scale. And so hopefully it's something you're really excited about. And yeah, I think just Cambly is like really good for the world. I think it's great for students. I think teaching people English, I think, is one of the most impactful things you can do for them. And so like, just immense value on the student side, and it's like creates jobs for the tutor side. Like, I think it's just like a positive thing for the world. And like, so I feel really happy to get to work on a thing that I think is really rewarding. I think it's really beneficial for the world. I think it's good for the world that Cambly exists. And it would be better for the world if Cambly was 10 times as big. And so that's kind of what we're working on every day. But I think I would tell myself, it's a long journey. Brace yourself for it, and make sure this is something you actually like really care about and could see yourself working for a decade or more.
That's great. It's a great way to wrap things up. So we really appreciate it. And last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at and check out more on Cambly?
Yeah, so you guys can. I'm not a big social media person, but you can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever. And I'm trying to post a bit more now, at least as we do things like this. And so would be happy to keep in touch with you guys that way. And I know you're all doing your companies, and so this may be less relevant to this exact audience, but we are doing a lot of hiring. And if you have smart friends who you think might be interested in what we're doing, we'd love to connect with them. And we're hiring kind of across the board. You can check out our careers page. But yeah, lots of exciting stuff happening, and so yeah, please send us any great folks you know of.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll include links in the description of this too. And we actually have a jobs board, so we can get some jobs up there and help spread the word. So
awesome. Thank you.
Well,
Appreciate it.
Hey, I really appreciate taking the time to join us. So I know you haven't done many chats and interviews, so this definitely means a lot to us here, and it was really great to hear.
Yeah, super fun, and like, yeah, love the questions from all of you as well. Really great questions, and it's fun, you know, always fun for me to talk to marketplace folks. I think they're super interesting and super fun, and so yeah, good luck to everyone here and everyone watching this later.